A shy woman becomes a psychopath after a terrible experience, and she takes revenge in the worst way possible, by severing the reproductive organs of her attackers. Indeed. And so, we dive straight into the movie, introducing a shy and quiet woman named Julia, who travels to the house of her lifelong friend Bobby, whom she trusted deeply. Upon her arrival, Bobby receives her with warmth and immediately offers her a drink. They chat and drink together, but something happens. As Julia sips the drink Bobby gave her, she soon begins to feel something strange in her body, as if her system had collapsed. Her vision suddenly becomes blurry, and she gradually loses consciousness. It turns out the drink Bobby gave his best friend was laced with a sedative. Bobby had planned everything, but it doesn't end there. He had invited his 3 best friends, Adam, Scott, and Matt, to carry out the traumatizing experience Julia was about to endure. In the film, we see that the ones most eager to participate in the assault were Bobby, Scott, and Matt. Adam at first wanted to participate, but then felt deeply disgusted and uncomfortable seeing how they treated Julia. Although Adam initially tried to stop his friends from behaving that way, he eventually turned a blind eye because he was alone and couldn't take on the 3 of them. While this is not justifiable, in the end, Adam could only watch from a distance as they did unspeakable things to Julia. After everyone finished their foul deeds, Bobby forced Adam to assault her as well. He clearly didn't want to, but they threatened him, saying that if he refused, they would kill him mercilessly along with her. Despite the threat, Adam tried to struggle with them, but it was impossible. In the end, they forced him to have contact with Julia, but the worst part is that she was drugged again to remain unconscious for longer. Once they were finished, they simply decided to get rid of Julia by throwing her into a distant river. Hours later, Julia finally regained consciousness. Her body was covered in blood, and she immediately headed home. She was in a state of severe shock after being treated that way by her own best friends. From that moment on, Julia suffered deep trauma, isolating herself more and more and refusing to speak to anyone, as she was already very shy. Every day, Julia went to a bar to drink alcohol. She had no motivation to work, opting to miss almost every day. Julia actually worked at a plastic surgery clinic, and a doctor named Lynn was confused because Julia hadn't shown up for several days, which was unlike her. One day at a bar, Julia overheard a conversation between a group of young women. One of them was a survivor of a similar assault who had recovered from the trauma. She mentioned a therapist, Dr. Tom, who handled cases of assault survivors. After overhearing, Julia followed the woman to the bathroom and asked her about the therapy. At first, the woman didn't want to talk, but upon hearing that Julia was in the same situation, she finally told her about the therapist who helped her overcome the trauma. On her way home from the bar, a woman named Sadie approached Julia. Before handing her a paper with Dr. Tom's address, Sadie asked Julia if she had reported the men to the police. Julia replied that it hadn't even occurred to her, likely due to the shock. Sadie then told Julia that she herself had been a victim and that after attending Dr. Tom's therapy, she was finally able to overcome her past. Sadie encouraged Julia to visit Dr. Tom whenever she felt ready. The next morning, Julia returned to work and gave the doctor an excuse about urgent family problems. During the workday, Julia couldn't stop thinking about the therapy, not just to heal, but to carry out an act of revenge. She could not accept that her best friends had done this to her. After much thought, she finally went to the address on the card. Upon arrival, Julia expressed her intention to seek revenge on the 3 men so they would suffer for the rest of their lives. However, Dr. Tom made it clear that if Julia was only looking for revenge without the intention to heal, he would not help her. But after hearing her story, he told her he would assist her in finding peace of mind through her revenge, provided she followed strict procedures and rules. Although Julia wanted her torturers to suffer immediately, Dr. Tom told her it required time and a careful process to ensure everything went smoothly and organized. During the sessions, Julia also learned various methods to seduce predatory men and then punish them by severing their reproductive organs. Another important rule was that Julia was not allowed to act independently. There would be consequences for doing so. Every action had to be approved by Tom. Julia accepted these terms to achieve her revenge and regain her peace. A few days later, Sadie began changing Julia's appearance, removing her glasses and dressing her to be more attractive. Sadie took it upon herself to train Julia on how to seduce men effectively. This training wasn't just about seduction. It also included self-defense. Sadie then took Julia to a bar to find a victim as a demonstration. Sadie approached a man, seduced him until he lowered his guard, and then brutally beat him. While she didn't cut anything that time, it was clear Sadie knew what she was doing. Once Julia completed her training, she was put to the test at another bar. After an initial failure, where she was ignored, Julia followed Sadie's advice to show more elegance and less talk. She successfully attracted a man and left the bar with him. They began to kiss, but Sadie had followed her and brought the man's partner along to catch him. Sadie was pleased that Julia had learned to give a lesson to worthless men. Now, Julia had to move to the next stage, the disturbing act of severing an organ. Julia went to a bar, found a target, and led him back to her apartment. As things heated up, Sadie and the other women from the therapy group suddenly appeared and handed Julia a surgical slicer. The idea was to cut him so he could never commit such acts again. Julia felt satisfied, but it was no longer just about revenge. It had become a source of pleasure. Julia was transformed into a psychopath. Julia could no longer contain the impulse. She began committing the act repeatedly. These deaths remained unknown to Sadie and Dr. Tom. However, something unexpected happened. Julia received a call from Adam. Adam called to beg for forgiveness, feeling guilty for not stopping his friends. He asked to meet her at a cafe the following night. When Julia returned home, Sadie noticed her clothes were covered in blood. Julia used her job at the surgical clinic as an excuse, and Sadie believed her. But the next morning, Sadie heard a news report about a man found murdered near a bridge. His organ had been severed. Sadie realized Julia was acting on her own and breaking Dr. Tom's rules. She informed the doctor, who told her to go to Julia's apartment for clues. Meanwhile, Julia prepared a kit of surgical tools and sedatives from her clinic. She met Adam at the cafe. Adam apologized again, explaining he only watched because Bobby threatened him. To earn her forgiveness, he offered to do whatever she ordered. Julia told him to take her to Scott and Matt. Adam took her to a bar where they hung out. Before entering, Julia kissed Adam as a thank you, an act witnessed by Sadie, who assumed Adam was the next victim. Julia successfully seduced Scott and Matt and invited them to Adam's house. There she prepared drinks laced with sedatives, the same thing they had done to her. Once Scott and Matt were unconscious, she also drugged Adam. Despite his confession, she decided he also deserved punishment for just watching. She castrated Scott and Matt, but for Adam, she took a different route. She gouged out both of his eyes. After finishing, Julia headed to Bobby's apartment for the final act. Meanwhile, Sadie found Adam's address and was horrified to find the three men covered in blood and near death. They told her Julia had gone to Bobby's. When Julia arrived at Bobby's, she was shocked to find him already dead, his organ already severed. Suddenly, someone struck Julia from behind, knocking her out. Julia woke up at Dr. Tom's house, sedated and weak. Tom explained that because she broke the rules and acted impulsively, she had to face a severe punishment. He intended to cut off her arms, legs, and tongue. Tom then revealed his own past. As a young man, he liked to dress his sister, but his father saw this as depraved and brutally castrated him. Because of that trauma, Tom became a therapist who took in women and treated them like daughters, but daughters he could control. Tom began to cut Julia's tongue so she couldn't repeat her mistakes. But just then, he was informed that Sadie was downstairs. Unknown to him, Sadie had already killed all of Tom's men. Tom went to confront her, and the two began to fight. Julia, still weak, fought to help Sadie. After Tom and his men were all sent to St. Peter, killed, Sadie invited Julia to start a new life together, revealing she had romantic feelings for Julia and didn't trust men anymore. However, Julia took Tom's gun and shot Sadie, killing her too. In the end, Julia felt relieved, having finally taken revenge on Bobby, Scott, Matt, Adam, and everyone else.
If you want interesting movie recaps, like, share, and subscribe to follow us for more movie recaps.